I'm Holly Wainwright, and I'm an author. I'm also, though, an editor and a podcast host. And you might know me from my work at Mia, where I co-host Mia Out Loud, which is the #1 podcast for women in Australia, and also Mid, which is Conversations for Gen X women. Both of those audiences love books, so I love those conversations that we get to have. I am passionate about this book because this story's been knocking around in my head for a really long time, about these families who go camping together, and about what happens when your relationships are all intertwined, and what happens maybe when there's one mysterious figure whose intentions aren't entirely clear, and whether or not they infiltrate everything. It's a book that I've been working on really hard for a few years now, and that I'm really passionate about, and I really hope that everybody enjoys it. So Liz and Danny are the two primary female characters in this book, and they meet at a very eventful mothers group session when their children are newborns. And they're really different kinds of people. Liz is kind of from a blue chip Sydney family, but she feels like her life is unraveling and her brain is unraveling in the early days of motherhood. Danny is from a much more working class traditional background, and she's got her own issues going on in that her and her husband have just come back from overseas. She's trying to find her footing and work out who she is now, and they kind of save each other. It's an unlikely pairing, but one of the things I really wanted to explore is how tight those bonds that you make at those very vulnerable moments in your life are. And Liz and Danny, who may not have come together any other way, are like thrown together in this situation and actually become each other's person. I really think that's the core of this larger friendship group, and the question of what you will put up with and overlook for your best friend is something I really wanted to talk about. So Lockie could definitely be described as a narcissist. I actually don't think he's the only narcissist in this story, but I think he's definitely the primary one. I really enjoyed creating him because there are some elements to Lockie's personality and the way he presents that are very familiar to me from some, I'm not going to name names, like that wouldn't be appropriate, but from quite a few sort of alpha men in my universe and in the universes of the women that I listen to and talk to every day. So I knew that there's a very compelling combination of confidence, physical attraction, of course, and this sort of slight edge of danger that often women can be, I mean, generalizing there, but can be attracted to, particularly in vulnerable moments, particularly if they feel that there's somebody who could protect them or serve a particular purpose in their life. I really didn't want Lockie to be entirely unlikable from the beginning, although there isn't that much that's redeemable about him by the end, that's for sure. But almost for it to be a bit of a slow reveal about just how controlling he is and just how far his tentacles spread into the group. I really enjoyed writing it, and I actually think a lot of women I know will recognize him, but no names. Yes, I wanted the black hole, as it were, at the middle of the novel to be something terrible, but also something that had plausible deniability from Lockie's perspective, and even the perspective of people who might have even seen it but weren't quite sure that they did really see it. Sadie is an unreliable narrator, no question, but she's also the truth teller in the group, and people often don't want to hear the truth. I also think, and I have definitely experienced this and seen it a lot in my world, is that we don't want to believe the worst about people we're close to. We like to believe that we are very clear on what everybody's capable of, and so it's easy to dismiss someone and say, well, yeah, they're a bit of an idiot, or they're a bit inappropriate, or they're a bit over the top, but do you really believe they would do that? And I think that it's more convenient for us to believe that people won't do the worst things, particularly if believing that is going to upend everything in your life. So I really wanted that to be this complicated nugget at the middle of the story, and I've seen it with my own eyes, when not in this circumstance, but when people refuse to believe negative things about people, they think truth is a slippery concept, maybe it is, and that they just don't want to face that someone they love could be capable of the worst things. Writing about teenagers was something that I really wanted to do, and that's quite close to my heart. I am the mother of a couple of teenagers myself. But It's a very interesting point in a parent's journey, particularly the beginning of those years, because you've had all these years, and these women together have had all these years of looking after these little kids, nurturing these little kids, that being an enormous part of their identities as well as their kids' identities. And so I think that it's such a shift when your kids begin to pull away and be independent and they're working out who they are. I also have literally seen what a sort of shock it can be in a social group when the teenagers begin to physically look more like adults, and the inappropriate things people say to you and about them to you all the time. It's really interesting because it's like this transfer of time from when the kids are like these little possessions that entirely belong to you, or at least you feel that way, of course they don't, to being these sort of completely separate entities. And I really wanted to talk about that. Whether or not I nailed all the teenage language, I'll have to wait until my daughter reads it. I think obviously trust is central to all relationships, right? But if as the narcissist that Lockie is, he thinks that Liz trusts him. He thinks that he has sufficiently done a number on her over the years that she thinks he has certain parameters and places he wouldn't go. And one of the whole forward motions of the book, I suppose, is her realizing that she might have thought she had a sort of tamed wild animal in her very beautiful cage at Bronte Beach, but that maybe that isn't who he was at all, and she's got this slow realization. I think the other thing is obviously the trust between the friends, and do you trust your friends to tell you hard truths? That is a big question, and not everybody wants the kind of friendships where people are going to constantly be confronting them with things they don't want to know. But also, if you don't have that basic trust, then what do you have? So I wanted to explore that in all different ways. Also, the trust that is kind of almost divided in a character like Sadie, where her friends have seen her at her lowest, and they've embraced her through that, but also they're not comfortable with the ways it affects their lives, so that her chaos at times and her issues, for want of a better word, has affected their lives. And so can she really trust them to have her best interests at heart? Can they really trust her accounts of things when they know she's got an agenda, or she's got unresolved anger issues from what things that have happened in the past? So I think that trust is a very complicated thing in this group of people. Camping brings out the worst in everybody. There is no question about that. I actually go camping every year with my mother's group, and it has been a really formative thing, because some of us are really good campers, some of us are really bad campers, some of us are really prepared, some of us are not. Some of us like places that are more isolated and wild, and some of us like all the mod cons. And so there's already tension in that, right, which makes it really interesting. But then the other thing, obviously, about setting any story in a sort of isolated place like Green River is that everything's stripped away, and you're at the whim of the elements. The place has a certain atmosphere of its own that is both magical but a little bit sinister at times, and everybody's a little bit out of control because they're away from home, so it's like, sure, we'll have a margarita at 1 o'clock, or sure, we'll let the kids run off and not worry about where they are for a few hours, or whatever it is. I think it really lends itself to drama because sort of all the rules are suspended when you're camping. You're not wearing shoes and you're eating strange food that you've boiled over a billy, and it's just a different world. And I was very inspired by some of the places I've traveled to in New South Wales to build Green River. It's actually a composite of a few different places that I've camped and that I love to go to. And I think the natural beauty and the environment that's always trying to encroach and swallow up this campground and needs to constantly be beaten back is almost, I wanted it to be almost like a character in the book. And certainly at the beginning and the end, where you're seeing what's happening to Lockie when he's out there, this idea that you think you're in control, but you can stumble off into a forest and suddenly you're turned around and you don't know where you are. I find that very tempting as a writer to want to set drama in those kind of environments, because I think they make all of us feel a little unhinged. Look, my answer to that's going to be a bit depressing, where I think we are at as a society about believing women and defending men, because I think there was a moment there where we all pricked up our ears about the idea of believing women. and listening to women's stories always with a sort of benefit of the doubt almost, and saying, well, we know that for generations, maybe forever, the odds have been stacked in favour of the man's version of events because he's, generally speaking, got the power on his side. And then I think there's been a perception that is not entirely borne out by facts that the power has swung the other way. And now what I see a lot when women are talking about things that have happened to them is a great deal of skepticism, a great deal of where are your receipts, a great deal of sort of wanting to undermine that idea that we should just listen, like not necessarily always believe, but always listen to what a woman's trying to say and understand it on a deep level. I think you can just look at what's happened to some women, high profile women lately, when they've come out and told some stories, the things that have happened to them as a result, that I don't think we're as far along that line as we should be. Not to suggest that you should always, like a woman speaks and her motives are always entirely pure. But I think that we still live in a world where we think, well, prove it, which we're not asking him to prove it. And I wanted to explore that. But also the title very much speaks to that idea of thinking that you know somebody's limits. Like, he would never do that. He might do this and this and this, but he would never do that. And the idea of, well, who do we think does these things? Who do we think does push that line? It's ordinary people. They're not monsters with horns and a tail. So I kind of wanted to explore that as well. How honest am I being about how challenging it was? Look, it was challenging, this book. It really, really pushed me because it's an ambitious storyline in terms of there are a lot of characters, there are multiple timelines. The themes I'm working with are quite delicate, as in, you don't want to get it wrong when you're talking about some of the things that happen in this book. So it was a very challenging book to write. It took me longer than I thought. It took me more attempts than I thought. It really pushed me as a writer and as a person at times, because you've got a lot of self-doubt around your work. But the thing is that, and I'm going to say it's such a motivational cliche, but the things that are hard are worth doing. And I think that really this book and where it's ended up and how it's being received, in as much as I know about that at this point, is very gratifying, and I'm very proud of it because it did really push me. I didn't take an easy option, and yeah, it was hard, it was tough, but it's very rewarding because I feel like I have written something that I'm proud of.